All right, hey everybody, this is Luke, and we're on the second lesson here. We're still in phase one, so this is all stuff that should be done before you really get into your marathon training. So today I want to just talk about five basic needs to run a successful marathon, right? And so just going to jump right into it. So the first thing you need might sound, a little bit uh, intuitive is endurance, right? But endurance is simply going to be the ability to cover a distance really without regard to pace. So for the marathon, it really just means you have the endurance to cover 26.21 miles. And with that, we aren't really concerned about the pace right now. And that's what I feel like a lot of programs will focus on. And that's why you see the big emphasis on 20 milers, and really even beyond that, right? Like you look at Jeff Galloway, and I don't want to knock Jeff Galloway program because he's the reason why a lot of people are in running, right? But if you look at that program, I think it's like 30 something weeks, and you ultimately run a marathon before you run your marathon. So that's really, I feel like that's what the focus is, right? And so we do just build that up. And that is the big component to our program as well. We're building the endurance, but we're building it a little bit different way. We're focusing on being consistent throughout the week, managing the workload maybe a little bit better, but we're not necessarily focused on pace right now, especially with the beginner plan. Like the first thing is, here's a really good rule of thumb for you is should be volume over intensity, right? So our first step should be to get the volume up first, the amount of mileage that you can run during a week at a time, whatever the case is, and then we'll worry about intensity. So number two would follow up with that would being stamina. So this is where the pace comes into the picture. Stamina is really just the ability to sustain a desired pace for a set distance. So now maybe our goal has moved from finishing a marathon to I want to run a marathon in under 4 hours, right? So now we not only have to have the endurance to run a marathon, but now we have to have the stamina to maintain 4 hour pace throughout that entire distance, right? And a lot of what we're talking about with marathon training is if we will build the endurance, no problem. But then the stamina is really going to come from not necessarily doing a lot of speed work at like VO2 max pace, the high end, like 100% of our effort, right? Sure, we'll get faster, but we're limited on how much we're going to get faster. Where we're going to really see the improvements is kind of that moderately hard stuff for the lactate threshold. If we can improve that, we can improve our stamina because then we'll be able to improve how far we can go at a pace that's going to be faster because it takes more effort to go above that lactate threshold, which is then going to limit how far we can run at a pace, right? So the more we improve lactate threshold along with building our general endurance, the better off you're going to be in the marathon, really a lot of different distances too. So number three would be being consistent, right? And you hear the mantra, just keep showing up, but it really is. I mean, it's not anything magical, right? It's you coming in, putting in the time, putting in the days, and it makes it even. And what makes that happen is being able to understand kind of the training principles, right? We don't. Not every day has to be hard. Your easy days can be pretty easy, but our workouts are going to be a little bit harder. And by knowing that and doing that and applying that to your own training, you're going to be able to be more consistent. I think back to I'm coaching a middle school team right now, and I have a young man, seventh grader, who just it was very hard for him to understand that like you cannot go out and run as hard as you possibly can every single day and expect to make it through the whole track season. But and I feel like that's how a lot of people are, right? Like they feel, and logically you're like, well, if I can run every day hard, I'm going to get better faster. But the problem is a lot of times the body can't keep up with that, right? And so we limit how much we're going to be able to, or you're going to get burnt out or hurt or whatever. And that's going to limit our ability to being consistent, right? And so, and that, you know, the plan itself is 6 days a week, but the reality is, like, if I can get you from running 3 days a week to 5 days a week, that's going to be really good, right? And if you can put 5 days together most weeks, you're going to be pretty well off by the end of the time. But the point is that you're going to have to be consistent. You're going to, if you know for a fact you can't run 6 days a week, but you know you can make five work, let's start there. You know, let's begin with that and then see what happens later on. But um, I think what happens a lot of times is people just kind of get overwhelmed and like, I can't do 6 days a week, and then they just kind of shut down, or they just kind of, you know, really kind of push too hard, especially on easy days, and then they get to where like, oh man, I really need a day off, and then that becomes 2 days off, and then it becomes consistently days off, and then, you know, it just kind of ends up not really spiraling, but it just kind of, it makes it easier and easier each week to kind of miss more days, and then all of a sudden you're late in the scheduling and you're not as fit as you want to be, and you panic and all that good stuff. So just being consistent will go a long ways, and being consistent allows us to do all the things we need to do with the training week after week, which is going to build your endurance and build your stamina. The fourth thing I have is just learning the difference between uh, being tired from training and overtraining, right? And so with the first 3 points, what I you're going to be fatigued, right? If you're running 5+ days a week, you're doing your workouts, you're doing your easy runs, just the magnitude of that is going to make you tired. You're going to be sore. But we need to learn how to differentiate that, which is kind of the premise of cumulative fatigue. It's not one single thing that builds you into that. It's just the accumulation of all your training over several weeks leads you into that fatigue state. But you know, one thing I see a lot with athletes is they'll get in there too quick, right? They'll just, because they've run too hard every day, they've not taken the right steps to recover properly, all of that good stuff, and they are in that cumulative. They say, "Oh, I'm in cumulative fatigue," but like, you shouldn't be in that state 6 weeks in. You shouldn't be in that state until you get to like 8 to 10 weeks to go, preferably 8 weeks to go, 6 to 8 weeks to go, really. And so you have to learn to the differentiation that. So, you know, you're going to have aches and pains, you're going to be sore, things like that, but it's going to be general feelings, right? Where if you're overtraining, your performance is suffering, maybe you're starting to develop a specific injury, you know, something that is more pinpoint, or it doesn't warm up as you warm up on your run, it gets worse as you run, things like that. That's important to learn, you know, because I know a lot of times people will work really hard. The vast majority of my athletes work really hard. They just don't know the difference between what's general soreness and what's going to be more serious, right? And so sometimes they'll pull the plug a little too soon, where we really just need to back off for a few days and then we can go back into it. Whereas, or the opposite, they'll go way too hard and go way past the point of cumulative fatigue and get into a point where they start to break down. So we'll teach you all this along the way. And then the fifth thing is really a healthy relationship with food and fueling. And it works, you know, there's always a lot of talk about extreme diets, like high carb diets are extreme, but you're doing an extreme event, just whereas low carb is an extreme diet that may or may not benefit you in endurance training. And we have to learn that it's serving a certain purpose, right? And so we should have a baseline of nutrition and things like that, but we should have a relationship enough to know that, okay, if I'm going to run 16 miles today, I'm probably going to need more carbohydrates than on a day that's off, or an easy run that's like an hour long of easy running, right? And so we have to hit that head on, because I see so many people with just not a very good relationship with fuel, and they use it either use it as a reward, or they feel like they need to restrict in order to lose weight. And so the problem with this is, like, losing weight might be a consequence of training, just because you're running a lot more, but you're still eating enough calories. You're just burning excess of things. But it shouldn't necessarily be a goal of training because our goal with training has to be getting better, right? And obviously, for some of us, losing a little bit of fat weight is going to help. But if we're starving ourselves and not losing fat, but losing muscle and not being able to perform, then we're not really gaining what we want to gain out of training, right? So we want to teach you what we need to be looking at, and not saying that you need to eat 70% of your diet is carbohydrates all the time, but we need to learn what it means to actually fuel for the work that we're doing, and then and being able to recognize that. And if that means having an extra bagel or something like that on a big workout day, then it's not something that we're going to feel bad about or anything like that. So just learning how to use food as your fuel, as a performance aid, and not something that we're going to restrict ourselves from, and that we're going to recognize that we might need, if we're running 50, 55 miles a week, we're probably going to need more than 1,500 calories a day, right? And so we've got to have that relationship where we're going to be able to do that and not feel like we're overeating, right? And so we have to, for some of you, that might be a lot of work. And definitely can be, but we will discuss that much more in depth. But if you can do those five things and have a good grasp on those five things, which we'll go much more in depth with over the course, you will be really successful at running, right? If you can just do those things, and you'll be really successful at the marathon. Having healthy relationships, really with all that stuff, is going to be very, very beneficial. But we'll discuss more of this, and those are the five areas we're really going to jump into. I'm going to try to teach you week to week where we should be focusing on and how we can do things with these five kind of principles in mind, right? And so, and once you have these down, then you can move more from a beginner to an advanced runner. Because to me, more advanced runner isn't necessarily just running a lot more races; it's having a grasp and an understanding and an ability to apply certain things to your training. So, all right, so that's it for this lesson. Any questions or anything, don't hesitate to ask in the groups, the forums, all the things you have access to, and we can further this discussion. So I will talk to you in the next lesson. All right, see you.